Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Regan.
Morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to our very different select committee this morning, and thank you for agreeing to appear before us. We have 10 minutes with you, so I'm not going to take up any of your time. I'm just going to leave it straight to you to make your presentation.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee in what is certainly a challenging and unprecedented period for not just New Zealand and New Zealanders, but the world. My written submission addressed 5 main points, but today I wanted to focus on the point concerning the appraisal process. In 2018, a number of teachers at Helensville Primary School advised me to investigate what was happening with the appraisal process of the principal there, Deborah Heisman. I put my journalism skills to work, and after a lengthy battle with the Board of Trustees, learned that the principal had not been appraised annually as required by the Teaching Council. I was aware that Ms Heisman's practicing certificate was coming up for renewal in October 2019 and was curious to see how the Teaching Council's rules would work out in practice. As it turned out, the principal not being appraised was only the beginning. The renewal date came and went, as did the 20 half-day grace period that the current Act allows for. As with the child protection policy investigation I conducted in 2018, I wanted to know whether this was an issue solely isolated to Helensville Primary School or whether it, again, was more widespread. The initial investigation revealed that there were a number of other senior leaders also employed with expired practicing certificates. I included in my written submission a series of OAA requests to the Teaching Council, and I wanted to reiterate a couple of significant points from those. Firstly, of the 25,441 teachers that the Teaching Council granted approval for the renewal of a practicing certificate, the Teaching Council was unable to state whether a single teacher had been annually appraised as per their own requirements because they don't check. And it's the same story with the 4,000 applications that ERO audited. They can't tell you if a single teacher has been appraised annually because they simply don't check. And yet PPTA and NZEI would have you believe that the appraisal process has become burdensome, that it's simply a checkbox exercise. The evidence suggests that ERO hasn't even been doing its job. The issuing of practicing certificates should be robust. The auditing of this process should also be robust. Currently, it is not. Doing away with it is not the solution, and I would argue that it will only make matters worse. From the Teaching Council's 24 January response, they stated that in the data share of the week of 16th December 2019, 851 teachers were identified without a current practicing certificate and where the practicing certificate had expired more than 10 working days prior. 851 teachers employed without a current practicing certificate. On the 19th of March, the Teaching Council provided further clarification around those numbers. Of those 851, 303 practicing certificates had been expired for more than 2 months. In fact, 191 were still on the payroll while their practicing certificate had expired more than 6 months earlier. But even more shocking was that 129 of those were still able to be on the payroll without a valid practicing certificate more than a year after the fact. In case you're wondering where the rest of the 851 are, more than 300 of them were employed while not being issued a practicing certificate. This is unacceptable at a time when child protection is meant to be at the heart of everything. The Teaching Council explained this away, saying, quote, "Beyond informing teachers and employers of potential breaches, there is no obligation on the Council under the Act to ensure that teachers and employers comply with Section 350. Furthermore, the Council has no powers under the Act to enforce compliance by teachers and employers with Section 350, end quote. The Teaching Council also added that they would be seeking clarification with the Ministry of Education as to which agency is responsible for enforcing Section 350 of the Education Act and what provisions may be contained in the Education and Training Bill in this regard to ensuring compliance or undertaking enforcement. My understanding is that no one has been fined and no one is enforcing this. Due to the requirement of the Teaching Council to be independently financially sustainable by 1 July, What risk to the Teaching Council is there if there is no enforcement of Section 39 of the Education and Training Bill and subsequently Section 615? By putting up the fees, more than doubling them, less people will be inclined to pay, especially if there are no consequences for not doing so. Enforcement powers may assist the Teaching Council in their requirement to become independently financially sustainable as well. I request that the committee consider maintaining the existing appraisal requirements of the Education Act 1989 in the Education and Training Bill. Further, I would request that the committee consider what enforcement powers are required, particularly to support the purposes of child protection. The appraisal process and the auditing of that process is a matter of child protection, and I would encourage the committee to consider my submission through that lens. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Regan. I'll just check with the others. Denise, have you got any questions?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Regan, for your time and very comprehensive submission. So just to assure you that we received all your documents, including your reports. You can definitely assume it's taken as read.
Thank you.
Regan, I think also on your cover, where you're very clear on the 5 aspects that you would like to see amended for this bill. Again, I thank you for that kind of clarity. It's not always that we get in submissions a very concise, I guess, summary of what it is that you're asking for in a change in a piece of legislation. It's really just a general question, and I hope I'm going to frame this right. I've been sort of thinking about how to frame it.
Sure.
But while I take on board with some concern the stats that you raise, and I intend to raise it with officials in another forum post your particular hearing, I looked at the letter that you received from ERO, the one dated 28th of May, in regards to bullying problems. So that specific topic that you raised. And where ERO said that they, quote, made an overall judgment as to whether the school was working towards a bullying-free environment to a great extent, to some extent, or to a limited extent. I guess I read that and then just started to think about, is there middle ground here in pretty much all the topics that you're raising where you want to see the full appraisal process or the full making sure that, children are protected under every sphere versus, best intent. Again, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but do you get where I'm coming from, Regan? Is there any middle ground for you, or do you see basically current legislation in terms of the appraisal process being the absolute gold level for you, and then some of those additional things that you are raising? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of individual items in there that are concerning. I don't think you can really narrow it down to one particular thing, simply because they are quite broad, and the appraisal process by itself is I think independent from the bullying, although there will be some crossover between those things. I think that the problem for ERO is that they're really not, as an auditor, fulfilling their obligations as best they could, and I'm not entirely sure how that can be dealt with legislatively, specifically in that regard.
Yeah, okay. Look, taken on board, I realise that appraisal and bullying were 2 completely different topics. I guess I was just, you can see the intent from ERO in their letter to you about doing their best endeavours, and wondered whether, if they were on this call right now, they'd be saying something similar in regards to appraisals as well.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. But your point around just raw stats taken on board, and as I said earlier, I intend to raise it with officials in another context. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Regan. We've actually run out of time there, so I'm sorry, Mark. I'll give you the first question next time, Mark. So I'm really sorry to have run out because I would have asked some more questions.